Thank you for your interest in leveraging adult learning principles and universal design for learning to advance inclusive teaching. I'm Dr. Peggy Kerr, an assistant professor of education in the Doctorate in Higher Education Teaching and Learning track at Gwynedd Mercy University. Although our university name sounds Welsh, we're located in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're affiliated with the Catholic Order of the Sisters of Mercy. In today's poster, we'll be covering three objectives. First, outline the main components of universal design for learning. Next, identify the six principles of andragogy. And finally, recognize what teaching strategies can be used to integrate the principles of andragogy and UDL to support inclusive teaching. I want to start off by explaining what universal design for learning is. It was developed by an organization called CAST as a framework for designing curricula that enable all individuals to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning. UDL provides rich supports for learning and reduces barriers to the curriculum while maintaining high achievement standards for all. As you can see from this graphic, each of the UDL guidelines has a brain-based focus to stimulate learning. Multiple means of engagement focuses on the why, which creates purpose and meaning in learning. Multiple means of representation focuses on the what, which involves both learning resources and developing knowledge. Multiple means of action and expression focuses on the how of learning, which enables learners to be both strategic and goal-directed in their approaches. In 2023, the strategies that support these areas were updated to have a more inclusive focus. This presentation integrates those updated strategies. The demographic profile of students in higher education is shifting from traditional age to predominantly adult learners. Andragogy, or the study of adult learning, can provide insights into how to teach adult learners effectively. The traditional pedagogical approach of instruction, where the faculty member is a sage on the stage, shifts to a guide on the side approach in andragogy. The father of andragogy is Malcolm Knowles, and he identified six principles of adult learning that, when honored, can create more highly engaging learning experiences to meet individual student needs and foster a higher likelihood of academic success. In this poster, I'll discuss how the principles of andragogy link to Universal Design for Learning guidelines and how faculty can implement them into their teaching to create an inclusive environment. It's important to note that as emerging adults, many traditional age students may also find these principles relevant to their learning. Here's a list of the six principles of andragogy that we'll cover in this presentation. As you can see, they focus on the unique needs of adult learners. Younger learners may not have enough experience or maturity to embrace them all, but I wanted to share this overview before we explore each separately. Need to know is the first principle. Self-concept is second. Engage prior learning is third. Readiness to learn is fourth. Life and problem-centered is fifth. And the last one is intrinsic motivation. Let's explore principle one, need to know, in a little bit more depth. According to Knowles, adults focus on the need to know, and it relates to welcoming interests and identities in the UDL framework, which is a strategy of the engagement component. This focus was expanded from the 2018 iteration of the UDL guidelines to include an emphasis on identities. Considering student identities is an important way to make teaching inclusiveness. Some teaching strategies to support the need to know include being clear about the outcomes the instruction and assessment are focused on, asking students to identify how those outcomes are relevant to their experience helps reinforce the importance of those outcomes. Sequencing is an important strategy because it requires the future learning builds on prior learning. Helping students understand the sequencing of the learning reinforces the importance of mastering current concepts to be able to master future ones. Authentic assessments help students recognize the connections between their learning and real-life situations. For example, in my instructional design class, I have students actually create a course so they can see the application of the theory to a course they might teach. Even better is when the students are able to teach the courses that they designed in my class. Self-determination means letting students pick how they will learn about a topic when they're offered choices of instructional materials. For example, print, audio, video, or graphics. It also means being allowed to select a topic of interest so they can apply the course content to something that is important to them. Finally, it involves students have the options to share their learning, for example, in a paper, a project, or a presentation. Reflection is an important part of the need to know because it helps students identify connections and make the best choices on topic, instructional format, or a sessional format based on their own experiences and perceptions. Let's move on to Principle 2, self-concept. According to Knowles, these relate to areas such as emotional capacity in the UDL framework or designing options for sustaining effort and persistence. Both of these relate to the gaining interest component of UDL, and you can see how important emotions are to how people feel about themselves, as well as being able to stick with that learning. You'll notice I added the note guide on the side as a reinforcement. In order to help students feel in control of their learning, being able to support them from the side rather than dictating it to them is critical in adult learning. Some strategies to support self-concept include scaffolding, which provides supports that help students succeed. I do this not only in my course design, but also in offering supplemental materials that can help learners master content in different ways. I look at the scaffolding I provide like a toolkit that I build each time a student has different needs, and I can find a new way to support those. Feedback is so important to self-concept. Providing prompt, constructive, and affirming feedback helps a student understand what they haven't yet mastered and also feel confident that they can overcome those challenges. Choice in instruction allows students to use the instructional resources that best enable them to learn. If they only have one way to learn and it doesn't work for them, they're stuck and their self-concept then suffers. Cooperative learning is a helpful strategy because students gain confidence from helping others and grow as learners when they're helped by others. The idea that we're all in this together builds confidence. Using instructional materials and examples where students can see themselves reflected is a very important piece of building self-concept. Allowing students to bring their identities into the learning is important too. Choice in assessment allows students to demonstrate their learning in the way that is most effective for them. Frustration about failing an assessment that is because of the assessment type rather than the student's competency hurts their self-concept. Moving on to Principle 3, which is to engage prior learning. Students are better when they can connect what is being covered now to what they already know, and adults bring a vast amount of knowledge and life experience to the classroom. This principle relates to the UDL area of welcoming interests and identities in the engagement pillar and the building knowledge area of the representation pillar. There are many ways that you can engage prior learning in your teaching. Here are a few examples. Create the opportunity for students to do a self-check on their prior learning. This can help them know what they've already mastered and what they still need to learn, which builds an important foundation for growth. Self-checks work best when they're low stakes or non-credit activities. Another strategy is the KWL charts. In this, a student documents what they know, what they want to know, and what they learned. Concept mapping is a wonderful way for students to identify connections among concepts using their prior learning. A brainstorming activity requires students to pull ideas from their prior learning. It can help students think about topics in ways they had not considered prior to the opportunity to brainstorm. Creating analogies helps students identify connections between things in ways they had not considered before. Analogies can help reinforce learning because the connection of the analogy creates another memory pathway. And finally, case studies are an activity that requires students to use their prior knowledge to solve problems in the case. They're applied because they're prior applied problems, students can bring their life experience into solving them. Principle 4 focuses on readiness to learn. This is one area where traditional age students and adults can vary greatly. A young person might enter college without any idea what they want to do in life, and that can create barriers to their readiness to learn because they're not yet committed to it. Adults know the challenge that taking classes creates for their family and work lives, so they must have a strong commitment to be ready to learn in the face of those challenges. However, this readiness to learn can also create resentment for adults when degree programs require courses that they're not interested in taking. Some ways to improve readiness to learn are inherent in the UDL guidelines in providing multiple options for sustaining effort and persistence, as well as providing options for building knowledge, which is part of the representation pillar. Some important ways to support readiness to learn include offering choice in instruction so students can use the materials they feel most ready to learn from. For some, reading a textbook is preferred. For others, watching a video, exploring a website on the topic, or listening to a podcast might be more meaningful. Scaffolding is really important to support readiness to learn so that students have mastered preliminary topics that are needed for what they're being asked to do. And each part of the learning is supported to prepare them for the next. Knowing which topics students tend to struggle with and identifying a variety of ways to help them master them is an important way to build your UDL toolkit. Just-in-time teaching is a helpful strategy when you realize students are not grasping what you'd hoped they would. Instead of plowing forward, you change direction to explore a topic more deeply or find out where students are disconnected from the learning. Connecting instruction to life experiences helps students see its value and be interested in embracing it. And finally, fostering a growth mindset where you let students know that you have confidence they can learn from their mistakes, that it's okay to fail, and you're there to support them through the challenges really fosters a willingness to work hard. Principle 5 is that adults' learning orientation is both life-centered and problem-centered. This relates to all of the action and expression strategies in the UDL guidelines. Being able to interact in authentic ways supports this principle. Having options for how students express their learning and communicate and ways to implement strategy development are crucial. In support of this principle, I put reflection in the middle as an important component of how students find the connection between their learning and their lives. Case studies are a wonderful way to solve problems. Project-based learning has students working through the steps of completing a project, and when they pick one that relates to their lives, it's even more meaningful. Experiential learning allows students to learn with hands-on experience. Authentic learning can be actualized in experiential learning or project-based learning. It involves doing something that you would in the real world. Simulations allow students to practice life skills in a setting that mimics real life. Problem-based learning helps students work through a specific problem similar to how they would in real life. It can be collaborative, which also adds to that real life experience. Principle 6 focuses on intrinsic motivation. Internal motivation relates to performing better at work, feeling better about yourself, and improving the quality of life. While external motivation of better pay or a work requirement for additional education may motivate adults, recognizing that intrinsic factors can be more important is critical. Intrinsic motivation is linked to engagement, representation, and action and expression. In this image illustrating the components of intrinsic motivation, you can see how purpose relates to engagement, finding meaning in a learning. Relatedness connects to representation as the learner discovers how the learning links. Autonomy is important to both representation and action and expression because the learner is able to select the path they feel is best for them. Mastery relates to action and expression as the learner demonstrates their learning in a way that is most meaningful to them. As described in this previous slide related to autonomy, choice is a hallmark of actualizing Principle 6 in teaching. Supporting a growth mindset by allowing failure, encouraging students to learn from failure, and providing support when needed all contribute to intrinsic motivation. Metacognitive awareness that can be developed when students think about how they learn facilitates intrinsic motivation. Finally, authentic learning provides intrinsic motivation because learners can recognize their application to skill development in real life. You've seen some key themes throughout the strategies to support adult learners, whether they're emerging adults or fully adults. Choice is a hallmark of inclusion, UDL, and adult learning principles because it allows each person to leverage their strengths and interests. Reflection is critical to making connections between self and learning, which both deepens learning and makes it personally meaningful. Authentic learning relates to the real world and helps students develop relevant skills. Support is a hallmark of UDL in giving students what they need to learn and demonstrate that learning, in being a guide on the side in teaching adult learners, and in making sure everyone feels included. I hope you found this presentation and poster helpful. I wanted to share some references as well as my contact information. I encourage you to reach out if you'd like to learn more. Thank you so much.